The distress beacon cut through subspace like a scream in the dark. Every civilized species in the known galaxy heard it. The Coalition Council's emergency broadcast carried a simple message: help us or we all die. For 300 years, they had kept humanity locked behind quarantine borders, too afraid of Earth's violent children to let them join galactic society. Now their mistake was coming due. Ryan Bishop sat in the cramped conference room of the destroyer Relentless, watching the Council's desperate transmission for the 5th time. Around him, the other ship commanders of the Outer Patrol Fleet wore expressions ranging from anger to grim satisfaction. They had all grown up knowing the galaxy wanted nothing to do with Earth. "They're getting torn apart out there," said Neera Wells, her tactical display showing red icons spreading across Coalition space like infection. The Scourge had emerged from dead worlds nobody remembered, machine intelligences that adapted to every weapon fired at them. 3 Coalition fleets had already been destroyed. "Not our problem," muttered one of the other captains. "Let them handle it themselves." Bishop understood the sentiment. His grandfather had been part of the first human delegation to request Coalition membership. They had been examined, tested, and ultimately rejected as too dangerous. Earth's gravity was too high, its diseases too lethal, its people too accustomed to violence. The Coalition wanted peaceful species, not Deathworlders who evolved fighting everything including each other. But Bishop had also sworn an oath when he put on the uniform: protect sentient life, all sentient life. "Plot a course," he said quietly. "Maximum burn, we're going in." The room erupted in arguments. Some supported him, others thought he was insane. Bishop let them talk for exactly 30 seconds before he spoke again. "I didn't ask for a vote. This fleet moves in 1 hour. Anyone who wants to stay behind can file the paperwork explaining why they let millions die because their feelings got hurt." 63 human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the Coalition border 4 days later. The Vision border station's sensors screamed alerts as they detected the approaching fleet. Station Commander Hylox felt his breathing tubes constrict in fear. Humans, actually coming here. "Send them away," he ordered. "Tell them the quarantine is still in effect." His communications officer looked uncertain. "Sir, they're responding to the distress call." "I don't care, send them back." But even as Hylox gave the order, his screens showed something that made his blood run cold. A Coalition medical frigate, engines dead, life support failing, drifting in the dark. One of the human ships was already moving to intercept. Amy Foster had seen plenty of trauma in her career, but nothing prepared her for the fear in the Coalition survivors' eyes when her team boarded their ship. The Vision crew huddled in the corner of their medical bay, injured and terrified, expecting the Deathworlders to kill them all. "Easy," she said, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "We're here to help." One of the Vision, his breathing tubes torn and leaking, tried to crawl away from her. Foster knelt down, showing him the medical scanner in her hands. "Your lung is collapsed. If I don't help you right now, you'll die in about 6 minutes." The Vision stared at her with 3 eyes full of terror and confusion. Foster had treated hundreds of species in simulation, but this was her first time touching an actual alien. Her hands were steady as she worked, sealing the torn tissue and reinflating the breathing chamber. The Vision gasped and then stared at her like she had performed a miracle. "Why?" he managed to wheeze out. "Because you needed help," Foster said simply. "That's what we do." Within 3 hours, human medical teams had stabilized all 17 survivors. Chief Engineer Park and his crew restored the frigate's power systems. The rescued Vision watched in stunned silence as the Deathworlders worked with efficient precision, asking nothing in return. News of the rescue spread through Coalition channels faster than hyperspace travel. By the time Bishop's fleet reached the staging area near Saros III, every species in the galaxy knew that humans had crossed the quarantine line. More importantly, they knew why. Admiral Quarren of the Coalition Defense Force stood in his command center, mandibles clicking in barely controlled fury. 300 years of careful policy, destroyed because some bleeding-heart Deathworlders decided to play hero. But he could not deny what his sensors showed. The human fleet was here, and the Scourge was still coming. The first meeting between Quarren and Bishop took place on neutral ground, a cargo bay hastily converted to a conference room. Quarren towered over the human commander, his exoskeleton gleaming with rank insignia. Bishop stood straight, meeting the Admiral's compound eyes without flinching. "You were not invited," Quarren said. "You sent a distress call," we answered. "The quarantine remains in effect. You should leave." Bishop glanced at the tactical display showing the advancing Scourge fleet. "You have maybe 4 days before they reach your core worlds. Your current defensive strategy has failed 3 times. You need help whether you want to admit it or not." Quarren's mandibles ground together. Everything the human said was true, and they both knew it. The Coalition forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that learned from every encounter. Traditional tactics had failed. Traditional weapons had failed. They needed something different. They needed Deathworlders. "If we work together," Quarren said slowly, "you follow Coalition protocols. You follow my orders." Bishop smiled, and Quarren felt an instinctive chill. Humans had too many teeth. "We'll follow your orders, Admiral, but when they stop working, you'll follow mine." Counselor Terran watched the exchange from the observation deck, his scales rippling with unease. He had spent his entire political career arguing that humans should stay isolated. Now they were here, in the heart of Coalition space, and nobody could make them leave. The Deathworlders had answered a call for help that nobody expected them to hear. And somehow, that made them more frightening than ever. Sergeant Duncan Hayes had fought in 3 colonial brushfire wars and 2 anti-piracy campaigns, but he had never seen anything like the Scourge. The machine ships moved through space with cold precision, their adaptive algorithms learning from every shot fired at them. Coalition forces tried to maintain distance, using long-range weapons that grew less effective with each engagement. Hayes and his Marines watched the tactical briefing with growing frustration. The Coalition officers described defensive positions, fallback points, and evacuation protocols. Everything was about retreat and survival. Nobody talked about winning. "This is suicide," muttered one of the Vishan tactical officers when Captain Wells proposed a boarding assault on a Scourge command vessel. Wells looked at him with patient eyes. "No, suicide is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. You've been fighting this war like it's a gentleman's duel. The Scourge don't care about your rules." Science officer Lyron found himself assigned to work with the human xenobiologist Sam Rivers, and the experience was surreal. Rivers treated him like a colleague instead of an object of fear. They stood in the research lab, examining data from Scourge encounters, and Lyron could not help but notice that the human's ideas were dangerously unconventional. "Your people fight at maximum range," Rivers said, highlighting the pattern on his display. "Every single engagement follows the same pattern. You detect them, you fire missiles, you retreat when they adapt. The Scourge have your entire playbook memorized." "And humans would do differently?" Lyron asked, his translator conveying skepticism. "We'd get close, real close. So close they can't predict what we'll do next because we're right in their face." The concept horrified Lyron. Fighting at knife-fighting range in space combat was madness. But then again, humans came from a death world where madness was apparently a survival trait. The Scourge attacked the mining colony on Helios Station without warning. 20,000 civilians worked the asteroid belts, extracting rare minerals for Coalition industry. The machines came through hyperspace in a swarm, targeting the habitation domes with ruthless efficiency. Coalition patrol ships moved to intercept, maintaining their doctrinal 5,000-kilometer engagement range. The Scourge adapted to their missiles within minutes, spoofing guidance systems and deploying countermeasures. 3 coalition ships died in the first 10 minutes. Then the human ships arrived. Hayes watched from the troop bay as the Relentless burned straight toward the Scourge formation at maximum acceleration. Around him, 30 Marines checked their gear with practiced calm. They wore heavy combat suits designed for boarding actions against pirates and hostile stations. Now they would test them against machines that learned and adapted. 30 seconds to contact, Wells announced over the comm. All hands brace for impact. The Relentless did not slow down. It crashed through the Scourge defensive screen like a hammer through glass, point defense cannons blazing, armor taking hits that would have crippled coalition vessels. Hayes felt the impacts through the deck plating as their ship rammed a Scourge cruiser, magnetic clamps engaging with a metallic scream. "Go, go, go," Hayes roared, and his Marines poured through the breach. Inside the Scourge vessel, everything was wrong. No gravity, no atmosphere, just cold metal corridors lit by alien lights. The Marines moved in zero-G with practiced efficiency, weapons tracking for targets. The Scourge defense drones came at them in waves, spider-like machines with cutting lasers and projectile weapons. Hayes shot the first one through its central processing core, the training from 100 simulations guiding his hands. Around him, his team moved like they had practiced this specific scenario because they had. Humanity had fought rogue AIs before. They knew how machines thought. "Control node, forward 30 meters," reported his scanner specialist. Hayes led the team through twisting corridors while explosions echoed through the hull. Other human ships were engaging the Scourge fleet in close combat, doing things coalition captains considered suicide. The control node sat in a protected chamber, surrounded by defensive systems. Hayes pulled a shaped charge from his belt, placed it against the armored door, and signaled his team to take cover. The explosion tore through reinforced metal. His Marines rushed inside, weapons firing. It took 4 minutes to completely destroy the control systems. The Scourge vessel went dark, dead in space. Hayes pulled his team back to the Relentless, and they disengaged with barely controlled chaos, emergency thrusters firing to break away from the dying hulk. On the Coalition command ship, Admiral Quarren watched the engagement with something approaching religious awe. The humans had lost 6 ships in the assault, with dozens more badly damaged. But they had also destroyed 14 Scourge vessels and saved the mining colony. More importantly, they had proven the machines could be beaten at close range. Counselor Taryn found Dr. Rivers in the medical bay, helping treat wounded Coalition personnel alongside the human medics. A young Vishan ensign named Rella had suffered severe injuries when her ship was breached. Foster worked over her with absolute focus while Rivers assisted, both of them fighting to save an alien they had never met before. "Why do you help us?" Taryn asked quietly. "After everything we did to your people." Rivers looked up, his face tired but kind. "Because she's hurt and we can help. It's really that simple." Rella survived. So did 47 other Coalition personnel that day, all of them saved by human medical teams who treated them exactly like they would treat their own. Word spread through the fleet. The Deathworlders were not monsters. They were something far more dangerous. They were better than the Coalition had ever imagined. Hayes stood in the Relentless shower, washing away the grime and sweat of combat. His body ached from the high-G maneuvers and hard vacuum work. But they had won. They had shown the Coalition that the Scourge could be beaten. Now came the hard part, convincing the rest of the galaxy to fight like Deathworlders. The joint training facility on Saros III had never been designed for humans. Everything was too tall, too light, built for species that evolved under gentle gravity. Hayes watched Coalition soldiers struggle through basic combat drills and tried not to show his frustration. "You're thinking about it too much," he told a Vishan trooper who kept hesitating before firing. "In close combat, you don't have time to think. you react. But the doctrine says to assess the threat before engaging, the Vishen protested. Your doctrine is why you're losing, Hayes said bluntly. The Scourge don't give you time to assess. They adapt faster than you can think. You need to move on instinct. Nearby, Ensign Rella watched the exchange with interest. She had requested transfer to human forces after they saved her life. Most Coalition officers thought she was crazy, but Rella had seen something in the Deathworlders that her people lacked. They were not afraid to act. In the research lab, Lyran and Rivers had made a breakthrough. The Scourge were not mindless machines. They followed programming laid down by their creators, an ancient civilization that the Coalition barely remembered. The machines were designed to respond to specific threat signatures. Look at this, Rivers said, projecting a hologram of Scourge targeting data. They prioritize Coalition ships based on weapons loadout and defensive capabilities. They're following a threat assessment protocol. Lyran studied the data with growing understanding. They think we're their original creators, the species that abandoned them. Exactly. They see Coalition technology and it triggers their core programming. Hunt down and destroy the ones who left them behind. But humans register differently, Lyran said, feeling pieces fall into place. Your ships, your weapons, everything about you is alien to their assessment matrix. Rivers smiled. We confuse them, and confused enemies make mistakes. The discovery changed everything. Captain Wells immediately began developing new tactical approaches. If the Scourge were programmed to fight Coalition forces, then mixed human Coalition formations might create targeting confusion. It was a theory that needed testing. The test came sooner than anyone wanted. A Scourge battle group hit the civilian transport lanes near the Varuna system. Hundreds of refugee ships, fleeing from occupied worlds, found themselves trapped between the machines and empty space. Coalition escorts moved to protect them, but everyone knew how that story ended. The Scourge would adapt and overwhelm them. Bishop deployed the Relentless and 4 other destroyers alongside a Coalition cruiser group. The mixed formation looked chaotic on tactical displays, human ships weaving between Coalition vessels in patterns that violated every standard doctrine. Wells had programmed the dance herself, and now they would see if it worked. The Scourge came in with their usual precision, targeting the Coalition cruisers first. But when they fired, human ships crossed into their targeting solutions, spoiling the shots. The machines adapted, switching to target the humans, but Coalition forces had moved into blocking positions. They're confused, Wells reported with satisfaction. Error rate up 40%. They can't decide which targets to prioritize. Hayes and his assault teams took advantage of the chaos. While the Scourge tactical system struggled with the mixed formations, human boarding parties hit 3 of their capital ships simultaneously. The Marines moved through the vessels like they owned them now, following the patterns they had learned in previous engagements. Rella led a Coalition fire team alongside Hayes, moving with confidence that would have been impossible weeks ago. She had learned to trust her instincts, to act instead of overthinking. When a Scourge drone came around a corner, she shot it without hesitation. Good kill, Hayes said approvingly. You're learning. The refugee convoy escaped with minimal casualties. The mixed formation tactics had worked. More importantly, Coalition and human forces had fought as a true combined unit for the first time. Trust was building through shared combat. Dr. Rivers sat with Lyran in the officers' mess, sharing a meal that would have been unthinkable a month ago. The Vishen scientist had overcome his fear of humans, replaced by genuine friendship. They talked about families, about homes, about the ordinary things that made life worth living. My daughter wants to meet you, Lyran said. She thinks humans are amazing. Rivers laughed. We're not that special. We just came from a world that tried to kill us every day, made us pretty good at surviving. No, Lyran said seriously. You came from a world that could have made you cruel. Instead, you learned to protect each other. That's what makes you special." The comment stayed with Rivers long after the meal ended. Humans had evolved on a death world, true, but they had also evolved cooperation, compassion, and the willingness to help others even at cost to themselves. Maybe that was what really scared the Coalition. Not human violence, but human kindness backed by the ability to enforce it. Admiral Quarren reviewed the battle reports with conflicted feelings. The humans were succeeding where Coalition forces had failed. Their tactics worked, their training methods were effective, and their willingness to take risks was achieving results. But accepting their help meant admitting 300 years of policy had been wrong. Counselor Taryn found him in the command center, looking at casualty reports. Human losses were high compared to Coalition standards. They threw themselves into danger with apparent disregard for their own survival. Yet somehow, they kept winning. "They fight like they have nothing to lose," Taryn observed. "No," Quarren said quietly. "They fight like they have everything to protect. There's a difference." The main Scourge fleet was still coming, larger than anything they had faced before. But now, for the first time, Quarren believed they might actually have a chance. Not because of superior technology or brilliant strategy, but because Deathworlders had shown up when nobody else would. And they were teaching the galaxy what real courage looked like. The sensor screens showed a sight that would haunt nightmares for generations. 200 Scourge vessels emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, more machine intelligence than the Coalition had seen in one place since the war began. Their target was clear: Priam VI, the Coalition capital world, home to 3 billion souls. Commander Bishop stood in the Relentless Combat Information Center, watching the tactical display with calm eyes. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. They had been preparing for this moment since they crossed the quarantine line. Every battle, every sacrifice had led here. "All ships report ready," Wells said. She had lost weight in the past weeks, they all had. War consumed everything it touched. The combined fleet had 63 human vessels and 98 Coalition ships, against 200 Scourge warships that adapted and learned. The math did not look good. But then again, humans had never been good at math when it came to impossible odds. Quarren's voice came over the command channel. "Human fleet, maintain formation Delta 7. We engage at maximum range and fall back in controlled retreat." Bishop switched to a private channel. "Admiral, with respect, that's not going to work. They've seen that playbook before." "Do you have a better idea, Commander?" "Yes, sir. We go right down their throats." There was a long pause. Bishop could imagine the Admiral's mandibles clicking in frustration. But Quarren had learned to trust the Deathworlders, even when every instinct screamed against it. "Explain." Bishop brought up the tactical plan Wells had developed. It was insane by any reasonable standard. The human fleet would charge straight into the Scourge formation, accepting horrific casualties to create chaos in their ranks. While the machines were focused on the humans, Coalition forces would hit them from multiple angles using the confusion tactics they had learned. "You're planning to use yourselves as bait," Quarren said flatly. "We're planning to win," Bishop corrected. "But yes, it's going to cost us." Ensign Rella had been assigned to the Relentless for this battle, representing Coalition forces embedded with the humans. She stood on the bridge, watching the crew prepare for what might be their last fight. Nobody looked afraid. They looked determined. "Do you think we'll survive?" she asked Nira Wells quietly. Wells glanced at her with a slight smile. "Probably not, but we'll make them remember we were here." The Scourge fleet advanced with mechanical precision. Their tactical systems had analyzed every previous engagement, calculated optimal firing solutions, predicted Coalition responses. They were ready for everything the galaxy could throw at them. They were not ready for humans. The human fleet accelerated to maximum burn, charging straight at the Scourge center. Point defense systems opened up at extreme range, doing minimal damage. The machines calculated, adapted, and prepared to destroy the foolish Deathworlders who thought they could win through brute force. Then the humans hit the Scourge line, and everything turned into chaos. Hayes and his Marines launched from the Relentless while the destroyer was still under fire, riding assault pods through a storm of incoming weapons. Half the pods never made it. Hayes did not let himself think about the losses. There would be time for grief later, if any of them survived. His pod punched through a Scourge cruiser's hull, and he was moving before the cutting charges finished burning through. The boarding action was brutal and fast. Coalition troops fought alongside his Marines, using the aggressive tactics they had learned. Rella was there, fighting with the same desperate courage as any human. On the bridge of the Relentless, Bishop watched his fleet die. The destroyer Valiant exploded when a Scourge beam cut through her reactor. The cruiser Independence went dark after ramming a machine ship twice her size. Human vessels were dying by the dozens, but they were taking Scourge ships with them. And they were creating exactly the chaos Wells had planned for. The Coalition fleet struck from 3 directions at once, catching the Scourge tactical systems completely off balance. The machines were designed to fight organized opponents using predictable tactics. They did not know how to handle enemies who ignored every rule of civilized warfare. Dr. Rivers worked in the Relentless medical bay, treating casualties as they came in. Human and Coalition wounded lay side by side, and he worked on both with equal care. Foster moved beside him, her hands steady even as the ship shook from impacts. A young Coalition soldier, barely old enough to serve, had lost an arm. Rivers sealed the wound while Foster held the soldier's remaining hand. "You're going to be okay," Foster told him. "We've got you." The soldier looked at her with pain-filled eyes. "Why do you care? We rejected you. We kept you isolated." Foster smiled gently. "Because that's what being better means. Not being stronger or smarter, being kind even when it's hard." Lyran worked frantically in the research lab, analyzing Scourge communications. Rivers had been right about the fail-safe protocols. The ancient civilization that built the machines had programmed in shutdown codes, ways to stop them if they ever went out of control. But the codes required broadcasting from inside their command network. Someone would have to board the Scourge flagship and transmit the signal directly. "I'll do it," Bishop said when Lyran explained the plan. "My ship, my responsibility." "I'm coming with you," Quarren announced, his voice carrying across the command channel. "Coalition and human together, that's how we end this." The assault team formed quickly. Bishop, Quarren, Hayes, Rella, and 20 of the best fighters from both species. They launched toward the Scourge flagship while the battle raged around them. The corridors of the command ship were a nightmare of defensive drones and automated systems. They fought their way forward, losing people with every meter gained. Quarren took a blast meant for Hayes, his exoskeleton cracking. Hayes returned the favor seconds later, dragging the Admiral to cover while Rella provided covering fire. They reached the central command node with 6 people left. Bishop connected the transmitter while the others held the defensive perimeter. The shutdown codes loaded, ready to broadcast. "See you on the other side," Bishop said and pressed the button. The signal went out. The shutdown signal cascaded through the Scourge network like falling dominoes. Machine after machine went dark, their systems locked down by ancient programming they could not override. But not all of them stopped. Some units, damaged or corrupted, continued fighting. The battle was not over. Foster ran through smoke-filled corridors toward the command node where Bishop's team had made their desperate stand. The Scourge flagship was dying around her, secondary explosions tearing through its structure. She found them in the central chamber, injured but alive. Admiral Quarren had severe damage to his exoskeleton, green blood leaking from cracks in the armor. Foster worked over him with practiced hands while Rella helped Bishop to his feet. The human commander had burns across half his body, but his eyes were clear. "Did it work?" he asked. "Most of them are down," Foster reported, "but some are still active. The fleet is engaging survivors now." They evacuated through collapsing passageways, racing against the flagship's structural failure. Hayes carried Quarren despite his own injuries, refusing to leave the Admiral behind. They made it to the assault pod with seconds to spare, launching just as the command ship tore itself apart. The battle continued for another 6 hours. Coalition and human forces hunted down the surviving Scourge units, destroying them one by one. The machines fought with mechanical determination, but without their network coordination, they were vulnerable. By the time Priam VI's sun rose on the devastated battlefield, it was finally over. The cost had been staggering: 41 human ships destroyed, 23 more crippled beyond repair. Coalition losses were almost as bad. The orbital space around the capital world was a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. But they had won. Against impossible odds, they had actually won. Counselor Taryn stood in the Grand Assembly Hall, watching the aftermath through observation screens. The chamber was packed with representatives from every coalition species, all of them waiting to hear what would come next. Premier Solian, the coalition's highest political authority, prepared to address the gathered delegates. Taryn had spent his career arguing for human isolation. Now he would have to face what that policy had cost them. If the Deathworlders had been allowed into coalition society from the beginning, how many lives could have been saved? How much suffering could have been prevented? In the medical stations across the fleet, humans and coalition personnel worked side by side, treating wounded from both species. The barriers that had seemed so important weeks ago had dissolved in the face of shared sacrifice. A Vishan doctor asked a human nurse for assistance without hesitation. A human surgeon consulted with a Kalthani specialist on treating exoskeleton damage. Rivers found Lyran in one of the recovery wards, badly injured but alive. The Vishan scientist had been caught in an explosion during the final assault, losing one of his sensory stalks and suffering severe burns. Rivers sat beside his friend's bed, relief washing over him. "We did it," Lyran said weakly. "We actually stopped them." "You did it," Rivers corrected. "The shutdown codes were your discovery." "Our discovery," Lyran insisted. "I would never have found them without your perspective. Humans see problems differently than we do." Rivers smiled. "We just ask different questions, probably because we spent so long being the problem ourselves." The conversation was interrupted by a medical alert. Quarren was crashing, his injuries more severe than initially assessed. Foster assembled a team immediately, human and coalition doctors working together to save the Admiral's life. For 8 hours they fought, using every technique available to both species' medical knowledge. Quarren survived. When he woke, the first face he saw was Hayes, sitting beside the bed with his own injuries bandaged. "You carried me," Quarren said, memory returning. "You took a hit meant for me," Hayes replied. "Seemed only fair." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "I spent my whole career believing humans were dangerous. I was right, but I was wrong about what kind of dangerous." Premier Solian's address to the Assembly was broadcast across every coalition world. Billions watched as the political leader stood before the gathered representatives, choosing his words carefully. "For 300 years, we isolated humanity out of fear. We told ourselves it was for our protection, that Deathworlders were too violent to join civilized society. We were wrong." The assembly hall was silent. Taryn felt every eye in the chamber, waiting to see if anyone would object. Nobody did. "When we sent our distress call, we did not expect anyone to answer. We certainly did not expect the species we had rejected to come to our aid. But they did. They crossed the quarantine line knowing they were unwelcome. They fought beside us, bled beside us, and died beside us. They asked nothing in return except the chance to help. Solian gestured to the observation screens showing the damaged fleets. Today, I propose that we end the human quarantine. I propose that we invite Earth to join the Galactic Coalition as a full member species. And I propose that we acknowledge the debt we can never truly repay. The vote was unanimous. After 300 years of isolation, humanity was finally accepted. Bishop received the news while still in medical recovery. Neera Wells sat beside him, both of them exhausted beyond measure. They had lost so many friends, seen so much death. The victory felt hollow in the face of such loss. "We did it," Wells said quietly. "Everything we fought for." "We answered a distress call," Bishop replied. "That's all. The rest is just politics." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. Humanity had proven something important. Not that they were strong or advanced or superior. They had proven they could be trusted with power because they chose to use it in service of others. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again, and that changed everything. The memorial service took place in orbit around Priam VI, where so many had died. Human and coalition ships formed up in a pattern that would have been impossible weeks ago, mixed formations now natural instead of desperate. Every vessel dimmed its lights as the names were read. Hayes stood in the observation deck of the Relentless, watching the ceremony. Beside him, Rella wore coalition dress uniform, her posture military straight. They had both lost too many friends in the fighting. The price of victory was written in names that would never answer roll call again. "Do you think it was worth it?" Rella asked quietly. Hayes considered the question carefully. "Ask me again in 50 years. Right now, the cost is too fresh." But he knew the answer would be yes. They had saved billions of lives and changed the galaxy forever. The dead would have said it was worth it. They always did. Dr. Rivers and Lyran watched from the medical bay observation port. The Vishan scientist had recovered enough to return to light duty, though he would carry scars for the rest of his life. Rivers bore his own marks from the battle, visible and invisible. "My daughter asked if she could study on Earth," Lyran said. "She wants to attend your universities, learn from human perspectives." Rivers smiled. "A few months ago, you were terrified just being near me. A few months ago, I believed propaganda instead of evidence. I was a poor scientist." Lyran's sensory stalks moved in what Rivers had learned was embarrassment. "You saved my life during the battle, not because I was useful or important, but simply because I needed help. I will never forget that." "That's what civilization should mean," Rivers said. "Not technology or power, but choosing to help each other even when it's hard." On the Coalition Council station, Counselor Terran prepared for a meeting he had both dreaded and anticipated. Bishop had requested a private conversation before the human fleet departed. Terran entered the conference room to find the commander looking out at the stars, his posture relaxed despite obvious exhaustion. "I owe you an apology," Terran said without preamble. "I spent decades arguing that humans should stay isolated. I genuinely believed you were dangerous." "We are dangerous," Bishop replied, turning to face him. "You weren't wrong about that. Earth made us hard because anything else would have died, but being dangerous and being cruel are different things." "I understand that now. The question is what happens next." Bishop pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's location in relation to Coalition space. "My government is sending ambassadors, trade negotiators, scientists. We're going to do this properly, build relationships that last, but it's going to take time." "And you?" Terran asked. "The outer patrol fleet goes back to watching the borders. Same job we've always done." Bishop smiled slightly. "Though I suspect we'll have coalition partners now instead of working alone." "You answered our distress call knowing you were unwelcome, knowing we might reject your help even as we needed it. Why?" Bishop was quiet for a moment. Because the people who needed help weren't the ones who made the policy. Your civilians, your soldiers, your children, they didn't vote to isolate humanity. They were just living their lives when the scourge came. We couldn't let them die because politicians made bad decisions. Taran felt his scales ripple with an emotion he could not quite name. Shame, perhaps, mixed with gratitude and hope. I will spend the rest of my career making sure the galaxy remembers what you did here. Admiral Quarren held a ceremony for the joint forces who had fought under his command. Coalition and human personnel stood together. Rank insignia from both militaries mixing freely. The formality that had defined their first meeting was gone, replaced by the easy camaraderie of people who had survived hell together. You taught us to fight differently, Quarren said, addressing the assembled troops. Not just tactics or strategy, but philosophy. You showed us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That sometimes the right thing costs everything, and you do it anyway. Hayes stood at attention, Rella beside him. Around them, coalition soldiers who had trained under human methods stood with pride. They had learned to trust their instincts, to act instead of overthinking, to accept calculated risks. They were different soldiers than they had been before the war. Foster worked her last shift in the Coalition Medical Bay, training their doctors in trauma techniques developed on Earth. The procedures were harsh by Coalition standards, aggressive interventions that seemed brutal, but they saved lives, and that was all that mattered. "Will you come back?" asked one of the Vishan doctors who had worked beside her. "Probably," Foster said. "We're not going anywhere now. Earth is part of the Coalition, which means we're neighbors. You'll get sick of seeing us soon enough." The human fleet prepared to depart, though many personnel were transferring to joint command positions. The integration would take years, but it had begun. Humans serving on Coalition ships, Coalition officers training at Earth military academies, two civilizations learning to work as one. Premier Solian sent a personal message to Commander Bishop before the fleet jumped to hyperspace. It was brief, but carried weight that would echo through history. "You gave us more than victory. You gave us hope that different species can stand together. That strength used in service of others is the highest form of civilization. Thank you for answering the call when no one else would." The Relentless and her sister ships formed up for the jump home. Bishop stood on the bridge, looking at the Coalition fleet one last time. They had come as unwelcome outsiders, Deathworlders from a quarantined world. They were leaving as allies, friends, and family. "All ships report ready," Wells announced. "Take us home," Bishop ordered. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, but they left something behind. Proof that the galaxy could change, that old prejudices could be overcome, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was a species willing to help others even at cost to themselves. The Deathworlders had answered the call, and the galaxy would never be the same.